The early morning fog clung to the gunmetal gray hills of Coronado like a living veil. Dew sparkled on the blades of grass, and the distant ocean waves struck the shore with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. On the training range, young SEAL recruits were huddled in muted conversations, exchanging whispers that carried an edge of awe, disbelief, and the faintest hint of fear. "Did you hear?" one of them murmured. "They say she can see through fog. They call her Spectre." Lieutenant Alexandra Harlow, known simply as Lex to the few who had earned her trust, crouched 100 meters away, inspecting her rifle with surgical precision. The .338 Lapua mag she carried was spotless, every part glinting faintly in the morning light. She was quiet, almost invisible, a ghost among men whose lives had been built on bravado and volume. But Lex didn't need to shout. Every bullet she fired spoke for her. Every movement, every breath, was a lesson in patience and lethal calm. Across the range, her instructors and peers watched her with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. Years of training, months of grueling exercises, and countless failed shots had left some of them hardened and skeptical, yet she had surpassed every expectation. Even in Bud S, where men were broken daily to forge strength, Lex had endured the grueling tests without complaint, her face betraying nothing but focus. At Scout Sniper School, she had outshot every male peer, hitting moving targets under extreme conditions that would have made seasoned snipers flinch. The stories of her prowess had grown into legends whispered in hallways and mess halls, and though she never sought recognition, her reputation had a weight heavier than most medals. Today, though, was different. Today, the call had come. A terse, coded message through the secure radio channels, a classified mission requiring a precision operative. No explanation, no context, just the weight of urgency and the gravity of responsibility. The young recruits didn't yet know what it meant. They didn't know that Lex's role could mean the difference between life and death for an entire unit. And most importantly, they didn't know that the woman they whispered about in disbelief was about to step into a storm that would demand every ounce of skill, intuition, and courage she had. She adjusted the scope on her rifle, her gloved hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had repeated these movements countless times. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the horizon, noting every undulation of the terrain, every flicker of movement, every shadow that danced in the fog. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern hidden in chaos, and Lex had an uncanny ability to see what others couldn't. Her spotter, Petty Officer Cruz, a seasoned SEAL with years of experience, watched her from a short distance, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, almost reverently. Lex didn't answer immediately. She just nodded once, a subtle affirmation that spoke volumes. It wasn't just skill that made her exceptional. It was her mind, razor-sharp, disciplined, and always 3 steps ahead. Where others saw obstacles, she saw solutions. Where others hesitated, she acted decisively. And yet, there was a quietness to her, a layer of solitude that few understood. Some speculated it was born from loss. Her father, a Marine, had died when she was a teenager, leaving her with a profound sense of responsibility and a deep-seated vow: never miss a shot that could save a life. Others whispered about the battles she'd fought internally, the nights spent staring at ceilings, calculating trajectories, imagining outcomes, preparing herself mentally for what lay ahead. The fog thickened, curling around the hills in rolling tendrils, and the ocean wind carried the sharp tang of salt and damp earth. Lex exhaled slowly, feeling the pulse of the morning, the subtle vibrations in the ground beneath her boots. Each sound, each motion was a potential signal, and she cataloged them in her mind, weaving together a map of possibilities. The young recruits watched from a distance, unaware that they were witnessing not just a woman preparing for a mission, but a legend at work, a master at the art of patience, precision, and silent power. Then the radio crackled, a short, urgent transmission that made her heart skip. No, she didn't show it. It was a call for immediate deployment, a signal that the mission she had been waiting for was now active. She didn't question it. She never did. Her hands moved instinctively, checking ammunition, scanning optics, and readying her gear with meticulous care. "How far?" she whispered, almost to herself, the words carrying weight in the cold morning air. Distance, wind, elevation, these were not abstract concepts to her, but living, breathing calculations that demanded respect. Her team gathered around, but there was a silence, a respectful pause in their chatter. Even her commanders, who had seen countless operations and elite operatives, regarded her with a mixture of pride and apprehension. There was something about Lex Harlow that made people sit up and pay attention. She was calm, unassuming, and yet utterly formidable. A quiet storm in human form. The fog seemed to bend around her, a metaphorical shroud shielding her from distraction, leaving only clarity of purpose. Night approached, though the pale glow of early dawn still lingered. Lex cleaned her rifle with slow, deliberate motions, each stroke a ritual, each part of the weapon examined with the intensity of someone who understood that perfection was not an option. It was a necessity. Somewhere in the distance, a storm was brewing. Not just in the weather, but in the world beyond Coronado. A storm that would demand everything she had learned. Every ounce of precision, courage, and instinct. She knew it would test her in ways no training exercise ever could. By the time darkness fully fell, Lex was ready. She packed her gear, double-checked every component, and glanced at the map projected under the dim lamp. Her orders were simple in words, but profound in meaning. Execute with precision, minimize casualties, survive. Her face was a mask of focus, but beneath it lay a fire, a determination that had been forged in years of hardship, discipline, and relentless pursuit of mastery. As she stepped toward the waiting transport that would carry her to the unknown, the whispers of the recruits drifted on the wind. Spectre. She's going to change everything. Lex Harlow didn't look back. She didn't need to. The legend was not in words, not in whispers. It was in action, in every deliberate step she took toward destiny. And somewhere in the fog, the world waited, unaware that the storm had already arrived. The helicopter cut through the pre-dawn sky, its rotor blades slicing the cold mountain air with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Below, the Hindu Kush stretched endlessly, jagged ridges rising like stone sentinels from a valley shrouded in fog. Lex Harlow sat with her knees pressed to her chest, her rifle across her lap, scanning the terrain with an almost obsessive focus. Every detail mattered, the tilt of a rock, the shadow of a tree, the shimmer of movement hidden in the mist. Her team moved quietly around her, seasoned SEALs who had faced ambushes, IEDs, and firefights, yet the presence of a female sniper of her caliber still drew curious, wary glances. The forward operating base, Fabi Sabre, came into view, perched precariously on a cliff like a crown of concrete and steel. The men aboard the helicopter murmured quietly, their eyes betraying a mix of awe and uncertainty. Lex ignored them. She had long ago learned to operate in solitude even amid a team. Her focus was not on recognition, but on calculation. Wind, elevation, temperature, trajectory. These were her companions, her constants in a world where chaos was the only certainty. Crouched in her seat, Lex thought of the mission ahead. They were to intercept a high-value target, moving through the valley at first light, surrounded by insurgents whose numbers and strategies were unknown. The mission briefing had been terse, almost cryptic, precise language meant to convey urgency without divulging classified intelligence. To Lex, it was all that mattered. Find the target, neutralize the threat, protect her team. Every other consideration faded into irrelevance. Her thoughts drifted briefly to her past. Memories flashed like lightning in her mind. Her father, a Marine who had taught her discipline and courage before being killed in action. The grueling days at BUDS, where every day felt like a battle for survival. The nights spent studying ballistics, reading wind tables, memorizing the arc of a bullet over impossible distances. She had chosen this path, and it had chosen her. Every hardship had honed her into something beyond ordinary, a weapon wrapped in calm, precision, and a near-mythical instinct. The helicopter touched down in a clearing outside the base, the rotor wash whipping snow and dust into spiraling clouds. Lex stepped onto the hard-packed earth, feeling the vibration through her boots, the air sharp and cold against her face. The base was alive with the quiet hum of machinery, radios, and distant engines, a fortress clinging to life amidst an unforgiving landscape. She and her team moved swiftly to unload equipment, every movement practiced, rehearsed, instinctive. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, maps and satellite images were spread across tables under dim, fluorescent lights. Lex studied them meticulously, tracing routes, noting likely ambush points, and calculating optimal sniper positions. Her fingers traced the curves of the valley, memorizing every shadow, every rise, every path the enemy might take. She spoke rarely, her observations concise, incisive. Crosswind at 2,000 meters is 12 knots. Temperature gradient will affect trajectory. Target moving northeast at an average of 4 kilometers per hour. Her words were precise, her tone calm, betraying no fear, only control. Petty Officer Cruz, her spotter and longtime companion in training and combat, leaned in. "You really think you can hit that from the ridge?" he asked, a note of doubt tinged with awe in his voice. Lex's eyes didn't leave the map. "I've done more impossible shots," she replied softly. "This isn't impossible." Cruz shook his head slightly, a smile breaking through tension. He knew she was right, and he also knew she didn't speak lightly. Her calculations weren't guesses. They were inevitabilities, and the enemy would learn that soon enough. Night descended quickly over the valley, turning the peaks into black silhouettes against a star-strewn sky. Lex found a quiet corner in the operations tent and checked her rifle again, cleaning every part with methodical precision. Her mind wandered briefly to the team she was about to protect. She cared for them in ways few understood, not sentimentality, but a disciplined, unwavering commitment to ensure everyone returned home alive. She imagined scenarios, every contingency, every potential error, every misstep, and she prepared herself for the impossible. Sleep came briefly, unwelcomed yet necessary, as a shallow rest punctuated by dreams of the fog-covered valley, shadows moving where no shadow should exist. She awoke hours later, stiff but alert, feeling the pulse of anticipation thrumming through her veins. The briefing was repeated once more, the tactical maps reviewed, and the helicopter loaded for the final insertion into the valley. Every movement was silent, efficient, a well-oiled machine of lethal intent. Lex's team moved out into the darkened valley, boots sinking into mud and frost. The fog had already begun to rise, curling like smoke, thick and suffocating, reducing visibility to near zero. The valley seemed alive, whispering secrets she alone could interpret. Every rustle, every distant crack, every shadow became part of a mental map she alone could see clearly. She felt a thrill, a quiet excitement that came not from danger itself, but from the challenge, from the knowledge that precision, patience, and skill would be the difference between success and catastrophe. Hours passed as the team advanced, the valley swallowed by fog, the terrain treacherous. Lex maintained her distance on high ground, finding vantage points and scanning tirelessly through her scope. Her mind was a machine, analyzing wind patterns, light diffusion, elevation, and humidity. Every calculation mattered. Every fraction of a second could determine the outcome. She moved like a ghost, silent, invisible, unassailable, a predator preparing for a strike. By dawn, the first outlines of enemy movement appeared, faint, nearly imperceptible against the fog. Lex's pulse remained steady, her breathing controlled. She reported quietly to Cruz, who monitored her data and confirmed her calculations. The whispers of her reputation among the team below were replaced by something more potent, anticipation and trust. They didn't fully understand her, nor did they need to. She was the unseen guardian, the silent force poised to change the battle before it had even begun. And somewhere in the valley, the enemy moved, unaware that a presence they could not see, a force they could not comprehend, was already calculating their end. Lex Harlow's specter waited. The valley lay before them like a sleeping beast, hidden beneath a thick blanket of fog. Every ridge, every crag, every fold in the terrain seemed alive, breathing, whispering secrets of the enemy's presence. Lex Harlow crouched atop a jagged outcrop, her .338 Lapua rifle resting against her shoulder. Her spotter, Petty Officer Cruz, knelt beside her, eyes scanning the mist for the faintest flicker of movement. Every sound, a twig snapping, a stone shifting, registered in Lex's mind with a natural precision. She called it listening with her eyes. The SEAL team moved in the valley below, their boots barely making a sound on the frost-hardened earth. They were shadows among shadows, relying on hand signals and quiet communication to maintain stealth. The air was so thick with fog that visibility barely stretched beyond a few meters. Night had surrendered reluctantly to dawn, leaving the landscape in a gray, diffused light that warped perception. Every step could be a trap. Every sound could signal life or death. Lex adjusted her scope, measuring distance, calculating wind drift, and factoring in temperature gradients that would affect the bullet's trajectory. She felt the mountains pulse beneath her, a subtle vibration that spoke of movement ahead. Her mind worked like a metronome, timing breaths, heartbeats, and the unseen paths of bullets over long distances. 2,000 meters, the whisper in her mind said. The enemy lay beyond the valley's rise, waiting, unaware that their fate was already being charted by a lone woman above the mist. Suddenly, a faint shimmer of movement caught her eye, barely perceptible, a shadow shifting with the fog. 2 o'clock, she whispered to Cruz, her voice low and steady. He adjusted the rangefinder, confirming her sightline. Lex's finger hovered over the trigger, not yet pressing, for she knew that patience was the deadliest weapon she carried. The SEALs below were moving cautiously, unaware of the impending threat above, their loves temporarily in the hands of someone they had come to respect but still did not fully understand. Time slowed as Lex scanned the fog. Each second stretched, elongated by the weight of anticipation. Her breathing was controlled, her heartbeat a metronome in sync with the rhythm of the earth. The faint outline of the enemy finally emerged, shadows coalescing into figures armed and dangerous, advancing through the valley with calculated intent. Lex's eyes narrowed. Every man, every weapon, every possible point of ambush was catalogued in her mind. This was no longer theory. This was reality, and in reality, hesitation could mean death. She adjusted the scope for wind drift. 12 knots at 2,000 meters, right to left. Humidity was affecting trajectory. She calculated elevation changes with instinctive ease. Cruz whispered, It's impossible." Lex's gaze didn't waver. "Nothing worth doing ever is," she replied softly. There was no fear in her voice, only absolute focus. Around her, the fog seemed to curl closer, as if anticipating the moment. Every leaf, every shadow, every whisper of wind became a part of her mental map, guiding her bullet before it even left the barrel. The enemy reached the narrow ridge leading into the valley. Lex's finger tightened on the trigger. The fog reduced visibility to the width of a rifle barrel, yet her mind compensated for every distortion. The SEAL team below moved into position, unaware of the precise strike that was moments away. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down. Every life below her was fragile. Every second counted. Then the whisper came, faint, urgent, crackling over the comms. Enemies at 2,000 meters. The words sent a ripple of tension through the team. Men froze mid-step, rifles raised, eyes straining to see through the veil. Lex's gaze sharpened. There was no room for doubt. This was the moment she had been trained for, the instant when patience and calculation converged. Her mind replayed the calculations one last time. Elevation, 124 meters. Wind, 12 knots, right to left. Range, exactly 2,000 meters. Temperature, affecting trajectory by 0.3 mils. She aligned her scope, crosshairs centered on the faintest shimmer of a moving figure. Cruz held his breath beside her. Now, she whispered. The shot fired. The world seemed to pause. The crack of the rifle echoed softly in the valley, muffled by fog, but carrying deadly precision. The lead insurgent collapsed, sending the convoy into immediate chaos. Guns fired wildly, men shouted in panic, and the SEAL team below seized the advantage, moving with disciplined urgency. None of them ever saw her face, hidden behind mist and scope, executing the impossible with a single decisive shot. The valley erupted into action. Ambushes flared, footsteps and shouts echoed, but Lex remained calm, her eyes tracking every movement, predicting outcomes, and adjusting for every second. Bullets hissed around her, ricocheting harmlessly against rock. Yet she fired another round with the same precision, neutralizing a threat that might have endangered her team. Every shot was surgical, intentional, and decisive. The enemy, trained and dangerous, was being dismantled by an unseen hand. Cruz finally exhaled, whispering, "I've never seen anything like this." Lex only nodded, scanning the fog for the next target. She was not exhilarated. She was focused. Emotion was a luxury she could not afford. Her team's survival, the success of the mission, depended on her remaining a ghost in the mist. She moved slightly, repositioning to maintain line of sight while avoiding detection. The fog was her ally, wrapping her in concealment, amplifying her lethality. Hours passed in a blur of shadow and silence. The SEALs advanced under cover, securing positions while Lex provided overwatch. Every enemy that emerged was catalogued and eliminated with minimal risk. The valley, once a place of silent threat, had become a controlled battlefield, not through brute force, but through calculation, patience, and the unseen hand of a sniper who existed beyond fear. As the morning sun broke through the fog in pale streaks of light, the valley lay in tense quiet. The enemy was routed, retreating into the mountains, and the SEAL team regrouped with minimal casualties. Lex surveyed the aftermath through her scope. Bodies, vehicles, movement now frozen in stillness. Her work was done, but the mission was far from over. Extraction points, fallback positions, and ongoing threats still demanded her vigilance. She remained high above the valley, a ghost of the mountains, silent, calculating, unstoppable. Cruz finally broke the silence. You didn't just hit them. You changed the battlefield." Lex didn't answer. She lowered her rifle, eyes scanning the horizon. The whispers of the valley, the fog, the echoes of the enemy's desperation, all blended into a moment of quiet reflection. This was her life. Precision, patience, and an invisible presence that altered outcomes without recognition. The SEALs below saw only the results, not the method, not the calculation, not the years of training that had forged her into something beyond ordinary. And somewhere, deep in the folds of the fog-shrouded valley, a legend was born. Not in headlines or medals, not in stories told by commanders or journalists, but in the silent, calculated moments where a single shot decided the fate of many. Lex Harlow, Spectre, had emerged from the fog, invisible and unstoppable, a force that would be remembered long after the valley returned to silence. The fog had grown into a living wall, a white, swirling entity that seemed to breathe with the valley itself. It muffled sound, distorted distance, and erased landmarks, leaving only shadows that flickered like ghostly shapes. Lex Harlow crouched atop her jagged perch, her rifle cradled against her shoulder. The valley stretched endlessly beneath her, obscured by a shroud that would have paralyzed any ordinary sniper. She didn't flinch. The impossible was her domain, and in this fog she found clarity. Her spotter, Petty Officer Cruz, leaned close, voice barely audible over the hiss of the wind. You can't even see them. How are you going to hit anything? Lex's calm, precise gaze never wavered from the swirling mist. I can, she replied, voice steady, controlled. I already see them. Cruz swallowed, heart pounding. He had seen her make impossible shots before, but this was beyond what even he had imagined. She adjusted her scope, feeling the subtle pulse of the wind, the temperature gradient, and the hum of the rifle under her cheek. Her mind ran through calculations in a rhythm no one else could follow. Trajectory, spin drift, Coriolis effect, barometric pressure, even the faintest shifts in the fog's density. Every figure was precise, every variable accounted for, every potential error anticipated. She exhaled slowly, letting her heartbeat synchronize with the valley. Then she saw them, barely more than shadows moving along a ridge 2,000 meters away. Figures armed, trained, but unprepared for what lurked above. Lex traced the path of their movement with her scope, noting positions, identifying threats, and prioritizing targets. The SEALs below, already moving cautiously, were unaware that the most decisive force in this operation was invisible, silent, and about to strike. Cruz's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. Are you sure? He whispered. Lex gave him a small nod, the kind that carried absolute certainty. It's now or never. Her finger brushed the trigger gently, not pressing, just feeling the weight and balance of life and death in her hands. The fog twisted around them, concealing her, revealing nothing but her calculated intent. She exhaled, held her breath for a fraction of a second, and fired. The rifle cracked, the report muffled yet deafening, echoing softly against the mountains. For a heartbeat, the valley seemed to freeze. Then chaos erupted. The lead insurgent crumpled, a single shot cutting through the fog with surgical precision. Vehicles skidded, guns fired wildly, and confusion spread like wildfire. The SEALs, trained and disciplined, moved instantly to exploit the disarray, taking cover, advancing, and suppressing threats. Lex did not move. She remained a ghost, eyes scanning, calculations running faster than any human could comprehend. She tracked the ripple of panic, adjusting her aim, neutralizing threats as they emerged. A second insurgent tried to flank, appearing briefly from the fog. Another precise shot, and he collapsed before he could react. Every movement was intentional, every decision the result of years of training and instinct honed to perfection. Cruz finally spoke, almost in awe. You're unreal. Lex didn't reply. She didn't need to. Words were meaningless in the midst of action. Her world had narrowed to scope, wind, trigger, and outcome. The fog, which would have paralyzed most, became her ally. It concealed, it shielded, it amplified her lethality. She had become part of it, a phantom moving with the rhythm of nature itself. The SEALs below advanced, securing the valley's midpoint, unaware of the precise orchestration above. Lex's rifle barked again, quiet and controlled. She accounted for every moving target, prioritizing threats that could endanger her team. Bullet after bullet flew with unerring accuracy, the fog swallowing them until impact. Not a single shot was wasted. Not a single life of her team endangered. Minutes stretched like hours. The insurgents, once confident and organized, were now in chaos. Their formation crumbled under the invisible force that stalked them from above. Every attempt to regroup failed. Every counterattack was neutralized before it could gain momentum. Lex calculated every possible escape, every ridge, every hollow, and adjusted her fire accordingly. By the time the SEALs reached the enemy's central position, the fight had already been decided, not by brute force, but by unseen precision. The valley, which had moments ago been a potential death trap, became a controlled battlefield. Lex's presence had tilted the odds entirely in their favor. Yet she remained detached, her focus absolute. A single bullet had done what dozens of men might have struggled to achieve. Her team moved with newfound confidence, inspired by the unseen hand guiding their advance, even if they couldn't see it. Cruz finally allowed himself to relax slightly. "They'll never believe this," he muttered. Lex only nodded. Public recognition was irrelevant. She was a sniper, a protector, a ghost. Her satisfaction came not from accolades, but from the silent knowledge that 11 men below her would live because of her precision, her patience, her skill. The enemy's vehicles had stalled, their fighters scattered, and the SEALs pressed forward, clearing remaining resistance. Lex observed, ready for any movement, any threat, but none emerged. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself a measured exhale. The impossible shot had landed. The valley, silent once more, held the aftermath of precision, chaos, and calculated force. As the sun began to pierce the fog in thin shafts of light, Lex looked across the battlefield. The enemy was in retreat, disoriented and defeated. The SEALs regrouped below, tending to minor injuries, checking equipment, and moving toward extraction points. None of them saw her emerge from the fog, or even knew she had fired a single bullet. To them, the valley had been cleared with coordinated skill, not by the silent, unseen sniper perched above, executing impossible shots through the impossible conditions. Cruz finally exhaled deeply beside her. "You didn't just hit them. You changed everything." Lex didn't smile. She adjusted her scope one last time, checking the ridge lines, the paths of retreat, the valley's folds. Precision demanded vigilance until the operation was complete. She felt no elation, only the calm, quiet certainty that the mission was a success. High above, she allowed herself one thought. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Invisible, untouchable, decisive. A ghost among shadows. A whisper in the fog. And somewhere, in the valley below, the seeds of legend had already been sown. The story of a sniper who emerged from mist, fired impossible shots, and vanished again, leaving only chaos, order, and awe in her wake. The extraction choppers would arrive soon. The valley would return to quiet, but the memory of that single, invisible, decisive strike would linger. The enemy would speak of it in hushed tones, and the SEALs would carry it with them for the rest of their lives. And Lex Harlow's specter would move on, silent and unseen, preparing for the next impossible challenge that the fog and the world might throw in her path. The fog clung like a suffocating blanket over the valley, swirling in thick tendrils that made shadows indistinguishable from reality. Lex Harlow perched on the jagged ridge, scanning the chaos below through her scope. The initial ambush had been neutralized with surgical precision, but the enemy was far from defeated. From somewhere in the swirling white, gunfire erupted again, louder, more desperate and far closer. The insurgents were regrouping, firing blindly into the fog, their frustration palpable. "Fall back." Commander Blake's voice crackled over the comms, sharp and urgent. The SEALs below hesitated, boots sinking into mud and frost, rifles raised but visibility near zero. The enemy had turned the valley into a maze of terror. Lex's eyes narrowed. Retreat wasn't an option, not while one of her own was at risk. She adjusted her scope and scanned for any threat. Then she saw him. Petty Officer Cruz, her trusted spotter, staggered under fire, blood glinting in the dim light. A bullet had nicked his side, throwing him off balance. "Cruz," she hissed into the comms. The world slowed. Every second mattered. Every movement could spell life or death. She leapt from her perch, moving with the agility and silence of a ghost, repositioning to cover his path. The insurgents fired blindly, bullets striking rocks and earth around her, some grazing dangerously close. Lex didn't flinch. Her mind calculated each trajectory, each shadow, each possible cover point. She crouched behind a boulder, eyes fixed on the advancing enemy, fingers steady on her rifle. One by one, she neutralized threats, her bullets precise, surgical, inevitable. The fog amplified her advantage, turning invisibility into lethal power. Cruz gritted his teeth, struggling to move, his strength waning. Lex crawled toward him, rifle providing cover. Every step was deliberate, every movement measured to minimize exposure. She reached him, pressed him close to the ground, and whispered, "I've got you." We moved together. His nod was weak, but it carried trust, absolute trust. For Cruz, she was more than a sniper. She was the difference between survival and death. Around them, the enemy pushed forward, panicked but still dangerous. Lex calculated positions, read patterns in the chaos, and fired with relentless accuracy. Each shot fell exactly where it was needed, cutting off paths, neutralizing threats, and creating corridors for her team to retreat. The SEALs below followed the invisible guidance of her fire, moving with precision, inspired even without seeing her. Minutes stretched like hours. Lex's muscles ached, adrenaline coursing through her veins, yet her focus never wavered. She dragged Cruz behind a large boulder, checking his wound with efficiency. "You'll live," she muttered. His nod was barely perceptible, but she didn't need more. She was a sniper, a protector, a phantom operating beyond fear, her purpose singular: keep her team alive. The insurgents, now desperate and disoriented, scattered through the valley, firing wildly into the mist. Lex's calculated shots forced them into predictable paths, funneling them away from her team's retreat route. Each target she eliminated reduced risk for the SEALs below. Her movements were fluid and ghost-like. No one knew where she had shifted, only that danger was neutralized wherever her presence was felt. A convoy of enemy fighters tried to flank the SEALs from a ridge to the east. Lex recalculated instantly: elevation, wind drift, distance. She fired 2 precise rounds, stopping their advance and forcing a retreat. Cruz, now steady beside her, murmured in disbelief. "How? How do you do it?" Lex only shook her head. Skill, instinct, and years of training combined into a single machine of lethal efficiency. Fear had no place in her calculations. The SEAL team finally reached a safer position, regrouping to cover extraction points. Lex provided overwatch, scanning relentlessly for any stragglers or threats. The fog had begun to lift slightly, revealing the destruction below. Vehicles overturned, insurgents incapacitated, weapons abandoned. Yet Lex didn't allow herself a moment of satisfaction. Extraction was imminent, but the enemy's desperation meant danger lingered until they were clear. The sound of approaching rotor blades heralded the extraction choppers. Lex's eyes tracked the valley, ensuring the team's path was safe. A final sweep of her scope revealed a hidden insurgent firing at a team member. Without hesitation, she fired, a single shot that ended the threat instantly. The SEALs below moved to the choppers, shields high, carrying crews safely between them. Lex moved last, ensuring every teammate made it to safety. Her rifle was loaded, ready, eyes scanning the perimeter. The fog, now partially dissipated, revealed the full scale of the valley, a battlefield transformed by her actions. The insurgents, once a coordinated force, were now scattered and retreating. The SEALs boarded the helicopters, one by one, guided by the unseen hand that had dominated the valley. Cruz, sitting beside her in the chopper, finally exhaled. You saved all of us," he said, voice trembling. Lex only nodded, scanning the valley one last time. Glory, recognition, accolades, they were meaningless. She had done her job. Lives were saved. That was enough. The rotor blades lifted them into the sky, carrying the SEALs out of danger. Below, the valley returned to silence, but the impact of one woman's precision would echo far beyond the mountains. The story of the fog sniper, the one who had emerged from mist, controlled chaos, and ensured survival against impossible odds, was taking shape, a legend already whispered among those who had witnessed it. As the helicopters disappeared into the rising sun, Lex allowed herself a brief thought. In the fog, she was invisible. In the storm, she was unstoppable. And in the hearts of those she protected, she would be remembered, not as a hero seeking recognition, but as the silent force that made survival possible. The valley lay behind them, transformed by precision, courage, and an unwavering resolve. The SEALs had survived, thanks to one sniper who moved like a ghost, firing like fate itself. And somewhere in the swirling mist, Lex Harlow prepared herself for the next challenge, knowing that in war, the fog would always return, and so would she. Weeks had passed since the operation in the fog-laden valley of the Hindu Kush, yet the memory of the mission clung to Lex Harlow as tightly as the salt-stiffened uniform she now wore back at Coronado. The base was quiet in comparison to the chaos of combat, but for her, silence carried weight. The halls of the barracks echoed softly, yet no sound could rival the internal echo of decisions made, lives preserved, and the invisible threads of action that had determined victory. The formal recognition ceremonies were being arranged, medals, commendations, applause, and speeches extolling courage and heroism. To the public and even many within the military hierarchy, Lex's role was monumental. Yet she did not crave the spotlight. She had seen enough battles, both internal and external, to know that glory was fleeting, but consequences were eternal. A medal could not undo the fear in Cruz's eyes when he was struck, nor could it erase the memory of insurgents collapsing in fog, nor the invisible weight of 1,000 what-ifs that had crossed her mind with each calculated shot. She entered the ceremonial hall, stepping lightly across the polished floors, each echo a reminder of the world she had temporarily left behind. Around her, peers and superiors whispered, all offering polite congratulations. Yet Lex's mind was elsewhere, tracing the paths of bullets, the tilt of the earth, the weight of responsibility. She accepted a polite nod from the commanding officer, but refused to make eye contact with reporters or cameras. The accolades meant little. The mission's success was the reward, and survival was the true medal she wore invisibly, beneath her uniform and beneath the gaze of the world. After the ceremony, she found herself wandering the base, rifle in hand, not for training, but as a companion and a reminder. Her eyes traced each ridge in the nearby hills, replaying the fog-shrouded valley and the precision required to protect her team. Cruz had recovered, physically at least, but she knew the mental scars remained. Each life saved carried its own cost, often unseen, often silent. She touched the metal of her rifle, each groove, each mechanism meticulously clean, reflecting the same discipline that had guided her through the valley. This rifle had been more than a weapon. It had been the vessel through which she maintained control over chaos, life over death, invisibility over exposure. The chapel at Coronado became her refuge that evening. Its stone walls absorbed the faint light of the setting sun, casting gentle shadows that danced across the floor. Lex knelt quietly, rifle beside her, and left a single round on the altar, a symbolic gesture she had performed only once before in her life. Etched into the rim were the words, "For those who never came home." This was not a prayer for herself, nor for recognition. It was a silent acknowledgement of the lives she had preserved and the weight of lives lost elsewhere, lives that no medal could honor adequately. Her footsteps echoed softly as she left the chapel, moving past rows of photos depicting soldiers long gone, heroes immortalized in images, but not in memory. She had grown accustomed to such reflections. This was the world she chose. Her father's lessons, the years of rigorous training, the sacrifices made in pursuit of precision and protection, all converged in this quiet acceptance of her role. She was not a hero seeking acknowledgement. She was a guardian, operating in the space between visibility and legend. Weeks turned into months. Lex avoided interviews and public appearances, maintaining a near-invisible presence even within her own base. Yet whispers of the mission began to circulate, how a sniper, unseen and unheard, had altered the outcome of a near-impossible engagement. Some speculated, some doubted, yet no one fully understood the method, the precision, the sheer mental rigor involved. Lex herself avoided the conversation. It was not a matter of pride or humility. It was a matter of duty. The details of her actions belonged to her and to those she had protected. Recognition was secondary to survival, and she had never blurred those lines. During this period, she trained new recruits, emphasizing patience, discipline, and focus. Her methods were exacting. Every instruction bore the weight of real-world experience. Precision, she would say, is not about speed. It's about certainty. Hesitation costs lives, and haste costs accuracy. Her presence inspired respect, if not admiration, for she did not seek either. Every lesson carried the quiet authority of someone who had walked the line between life and death, and had done so with unwavering competence. One evening, Cruz visited, a faint scar running along his side as a reminder of the operation. He spoke quietly, almost reverently. "You could have had recognition. They're calling you a hero." Lex didn't answer immediately. She gazed at the horizon where the sun bled orange over the waves. "I didn't pull the trigger for medals," she said softly. "I pulled it so someone else's son, someone else's friend, someone else's teammate could come home alive. That's enough." Cruz nodded, understanding the silent burden she carried, one that could not be shared, and yet was profoundly understood. As night fell over Coronado, Lex walked the perimeter alone. The wind carried the faint smell of salt and damp earth, familiar and grounding. The rifle rested against her shoulder, its weight a comfort as much as a reminder. She reflected on the mission, replaying each calculated shot, each split-second decision, each risk assumed to ensure the survival of her team. The medal ceremony had passed, accolades had been offered, but she had left them behind, silent and unseen, because the value of the mission could not be measured in ceremonies. The legend of the Fog Sniper had begun, whispered among her peers, respected by commanders, and murmured in hushed tones by those who understood the true stakes of combat. Yet Lex herself remained largely invisible, choosing solitude over recognition, reflection over celebration. Each day she spent at Coronado became a balance between instruction, preparation, and contemplation, a ritual of quiet excellence. She often returned to the chapel in solitude, kneeling briefly, tracing the outline of the round she had left on the altar. Not as penance, not as worship, but as a connection to a responsibility she bore silently. Lives preserved, enemies neutralized, chaos controlled. These were her victories, and they needed no audience. In the quiet, she allowed herself a fleeting acknowledgement. She had survived the fog, and in doing so, she had ensured others survived with her. And as she walked back to her quarters that night, the moonlight reflecting off the waves beyond the base, Lex Harlow felt the quiet satisfaction of one who had acted decisively, invisibly, and without expectation. The world might never fully understand the calculus of her mind, the discipline of her spirit, or the courage it required to act alone. But for her, the mission was complete. The medal, if it came, would be meaningless. The lives saved, the silence preserved, and the ghosts honored. These were her rewards. Somewhere in the distance, faint whispers began to circulate among new recruits at Coronado. Tales of the fog sniper, the unseen guardian, the one who emerged from mist and legend alike. Lex smiled faintly to herself, not because she sought fame, but because the story carried a truth she knew well. Courage doesn't seek recognition. It whispers. And in that whisper, the mission lived on, quiet, invisible, and eternal. Weeks had passed since Lex Harlow returned from the fog-laden valley, yet her reputation as the fog sniper had grown quietly among SEAL circles and intelligence operatives. Classified reports, secure communications, and whispered briefings carried her legend across bases and commands. The broader public knew little, only vague hints of a successful high-value operation in the Hindu Kush. But Lex's mission was about to step into a spotlight she never sought. The congressional hearing was set in a stark, imposing chamber, high ceilings and wood panels echoing every footstep. Lex walked through the entrance, rifle left behind, her uniform crisp and precise. Cameras clicked, reporters murmured, and whispers of her recent accomplishments filled the room like a low hum. Her eyes remained focused ahead, calculating, observing, scanning the faces of the lawmakers who would question her, the press who would interpret her words, and the audience who would absorb every syllable. The lead investigator, Senator Reynolds, greeted her with a firm handshake. "Lieutenant Harlow," he said, voice measured but curious, "the nation owes you a debt. Please, tell us what happened." Lex nodded once, keeping her expression calm and neutral. Her mission was not to garner applause, but to relay facts, precise, truthful, and devoid of embellishment. Every word mattered, as much as a bullet in the valley had mattered. She began with the operation's timeline, detailing insertion points, enemy positioning, and team movements. Her tone was measured, her articulation clear, and her focus unshakable. "Our team was operating under extreme conditions," she explained. "Visibility was near zero due to dense fog. Enemy forces were highly trained and mobile. My role was to provide overwatch and neutralize high-risk threats to ensure the survival of the SEAL unit." She avoided dramatics, keeping her recount factual, almost clinical, yet every sentence carried the weight of lives preserved. Senator Reynolds raised a brow. "We understand the conditions were extreme, but reports suggest you executed shots that defied conventional sniper ranges. Can you explain?" Lex paused, eyes steady. Every shot was calculated using environmental variables: wind speed, temperature gradients, elevation, and target movement. My training and preparation allowed for precise execution. It was not luck. It was calculation and discipline. Her words resonated with authority. The room fell silent, as though the weight of responsibility behind each shot hung visibly in the air. Questions followed rapidly: operational strategy, risk assessment, team coordination, and the margin of error inherent in long-range sniper fire. Lex answered each with precision, never exaggerating, never minimizing. Every word reflected the discipline ingrained in her, the clarity she had relied upon in the fog, and the unwavering focus that had saved lives. Some lawmakers leaned forward, fascinated by the invisible orchestration behind a battlefield that had seemed chaotic from afar. Then came the toughest question. Lieutenant Harlow, why did you operate largely unseen, without seeking credit, when your actions directly altered the outcome of this mission? Lex's gaze swept the chamber. Recognition was never the objective. My responsibility was to ensure the survival of the men under my protection. Success is measured not by applause, but by lives saved and the completion of the mission. That is the measure I hold. Her voice was calm, yet it carried the quiet force of absolute conviction. Cameras clicked as reporters took notes furiously. Some were awed by her restraint, others frustrated by her refusal to dramatize. Yet there was a growing sense among all present that they were witnessing someone extraordinary, a woman whose actions transcended conventional heroism, defined not by spectacle, but by silent, lethal efficiency. Outside the chamber, rumors of the hearing spread quickly. Analysts, journalists, and even military enthusiasts debated the implications of her testimony. Fog sniper, ghost in the mist, the woman who controlled chaos nicknames emerged spontaneously, fueled by curiosity and awe. Lex, however, ignored the chatter. She returned to Coronado, her focus once again shifting to training, preparation, and reflection. She had acted decisively in the valley. She had lived with the consequences. Recognition was peripheral. Back on base, Lex found Cruz waiting, a quiet smile crossing his face. "They called you a hero," he said softly. Lex shook her head, a faint smile of her own appearing. "I don't do this for titles," she replied. "I do it because someone has to." Cruz nodded, understanding perfectly. Their bond had been forged in fog, fire, and adversity, and no medal, no hearing, could alter that unspoken trust. The legend, however, could not be contained. SEALs across the globe shared stories of the operation, how a lone sniper in the fog had orchestrated chaos into victory. Some stories were exaggerated, some understated, but the core truth remained. Lex Harlow had altered the battlefield in ways few could comprehend, using skill, patience, and precision. And through it all, she remained unseen, almost mythical, a presence defined by action rather than recognition. Late one evening, Lex walked along the base perimeter, moonlight reflecting on the ocean waves beyond. The air was cool, carrying salt and damp earth, grounding her in the reality of a world she understood intimately. She reflected on the hearing, the whispers of the press, and the growing legend. It was surreal, yet it did not tempt her. Glory, applause, or accolades were fleeting. The lives saved, the integrity of action, and the quiet satisfaction of duty were permanent. Her rifle rested beside her, polished, precise, familiar. She traced her fingers over it, thinking of every shot fired, every life saved, every split-second decision that had defined the valley. To others, it was a story of heroism. To her, it was simply responsibility executed perfectly. She had emerged from the fog, unseen and unstoppable, yet her true satisfaction came not from legend, but from the quiet, enduring knowledge that she had protected her team. In the days that followed, she returned to training, instructing new recruits with the same discipline, patience, and precision that had defined her career. Success, she told them one morning, is not in recognition. It is in preparation, calculation, and action under pressure. You may never be seen, but your work matters all the same. Her words carried authority, experience, and the quiet gravitas of someone who had tested the limits of human skill under extreme conditions. The congressional hearing became another ripple in her life, significant to others. But for Lex, merely a confirmation of what she already knew: skill, Patience, courage, and discipline were invisible forces that shape outcomes. Unseen yet decisive. And in that quiet understanding, she found satisfaction. Recognition, medals, and stories were fleeting. Precision and duty endured. The fog sniper had emerged, testified, and remained invisible. The world knew of her, yet did not fully know her. That was as it should be. Her mission was never about fame. It was about impact, invisibility, and responsibility. And for Lex Harlow, that was enough. Months had passed since the congressional testimony, and the whispered legend of the fog sniper had spread across military circles. Lex Harlow returned to Coronado not for recognition, but because her mission was never about accolades. It was about preparation, precision, and presence, invisible yet decisive. The base had settled into a rhythm, a familiar cadence of drills, exercises, and quiet reflection, but for Lex, the world beyond the base remained unpredictable, a realm where chaos could erupt at any moment. Her mornings began before sunrise. The ocean waves whispered against the shore, the wind carrying salt and promise across the training grounds. Lex moved through her drills with meticulous care, calibrating weapons, reviewing tactical maps, and running simulations for scenarios that might never occur, yet would be a reality one day. New recruits trained under her gaze, disciplined and unflinching, learning lessons in silence, patience, and observation. They did not fully understand her legend, but they respected her authority, sensing that the woman before them had walked paths no textbook could teach. Cruz joined her for one early morning session. His recovery had been complete, though the memory of that valley and her decisive action lingered like an invisible shadow. "They're still talking about you," he said quietly, watching recruits move with precision under Lex's instruction. "Even outside the SEALs, they call you a phantom." Lex gave him a faint nod. "A phantom isn't interested in reputation," she replied. "We're measured by results, not applause." Her voice carried authority, calmness, and an unshakable sense of focus, traits that had defined her career from her earliest missions to the impossible shot that had turned a valley into a controlled battlefield. Despite the quiet on base, the world outside remained uncertain. Intelligence reports hinted at new threats in remote regions, areas of geopolitical instability where chaos thrived. For Lex, this was not news. It was opportunity. She thrived in situations where stakes were high, variables unpredictable, and precision demanded. She trained relentlessly, refining techniques, running simulations, and mentoring others in the subtle art of control under extreme conditions. Her mind remained a finely tuned instrument, calibrated for the fog, the chaos, and the impossible scenarios that awaited. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep crimson and gold, Lex received a secure communication. A high-value target had been located in a remote mountainous region, an operation requiring stealth, patience, and precision beyond conventional limits. Her team assembled quietly, moving like shadows under the dim light. Lex's role was clear: provide overwatch, neutralize threats, and ensure the success of the operation. Yet, as always, she would do so unseen, a ghost among peaks and valleys. The helicopter inserted them into the target zone as dawn approached. Lex crouched on a rocky outcrop, surveying the terrain, calculating every angle, reading every shadow. The fog had begun to rise again, curling and twisting like a living entity. Her pulse was steady. Her mind ran through wind, temperature, elevation, and potential enemy movement in milliseconds. Cruz, her longtime spotter, monitored her calculations, the two operating as a seamless unit honed by experience. Every movement, every adjustment, every calculation was the embodiment of years of training and discipline. The enemy appeared, moving cautiously through the terrain, unaware of the invisible presence above. Lex aligned her scope, adjusting for variables that would have seemed impossible to others. Her finger hovered over the trigger, anticipation perfectly synchronized with calculation. One by one, she neutralized threats, creating corridors of safety for the seals below. Every shot was precise, intentional, and decisive. The operation unfolded exactly as she had projected, chaos converted into order by an unseen hand. As the last target fell and the seals secured the area, Lex remained in position, scanning for residual threats. She did not move immediately to extraction. Her satisfaction was quiet and controlled, rooted not in recognition, but in the certainty that the mission had succeeded and her team was safe. The fog, once a source of uncertainty, had become her ally, her partner in executing impossible outcomes. When extraction finally arrived, she moved toward the helicopters, silent, efficient, unseen by most, yet essential to every success. Cruz joined her, offering a small smile. "You never change," he said. Lex merely nodded, eyes scanning the terrain even as she boarded. Her vigilance was not optional. It was a habit, a necessity born of countless missions where lives depended on her calculation and resolve. Back at base, the aftermath of the operation unfolded quietly. Reports filtered up through command channels. Analysts marveled at the precision and effectiveness of the operation, and whispers of the fog sniper spread further. Yet Lex remained detached. Recognition was fleeting, a distraction from the work that mattered. She walked the base at night, rifle in hand, reflecting on the operation, the lives preserved, and the invisible impact she had had once again. Her role as a mentor continued, guiding new recruits not just in marksmanship or tactics, but in the mental discipline required for unseen action. Precision isn't about speed, she told them one evening, overlooking the ocean. It's about certainty, calm under pressure, awareness, and above all, control over yourself before you control the environment. You may never be seen, but your impact can save lives. Her words carried the weight of experience, of survival, and of the quiet heroism that defined her existence. Lex Harlow had become more than a sniper. She was a symbol, not of glory, but of invisible strength, of calm mastery over chaos, and of the moral clarity that guided every decision in life or death situations. The fog would return, the threats would continue, and chaos would inevitably arise. But she was ready. She would return to it again, as she always had, unseen, unstoppable, and precise. In the quiet of the night, she allowed herself a brief reflection. The world would remember the fog, the impossible shots, the legend whispered among soldiers and analysts. But she would remain a phantom, visible only in the results of her actions, invisible in presence, a ghost moving through shadows with lethal efficiency. That was her choice, her mission, and her truth. And so the legend endured, not in headlines or ceremonies, but in the lives preserved, the chaos contained, and the silent knowledge that one woman, invisible and precise, could alter the course of events without ever being fully seen. The phantom had returned, not for fame, not for glory, but for duty, discipline, and the unspoken responsibility she had embraced long before the fog, long before the valley, long before the world would know her name. She walked the perimeter one last time that night, the moonlight reflecting off the waves, wind carrying the salt and the scent of earth. Somewhere, far away, threats awaited, as always. And somewhere, the next impossible mission awaited. Lex Harlow, the fog sniper, the phantom, the unseen guardian, was already calculating, observing, preparing. And when the time came, she would emerge from the mist once more, precise, deadly, invisible, a ghost whose legend would quietly shape the battlefield for years to come.